talk to Alex, and then we'll come back around. Alex,
Yeah.
here we go. We meet fascinating people, and then we see what happens. So, what do you want to talk about?
That's a great question. I've been working on that. Okay, so I live in Milwaukee. Milwaukee is generally accepted to be the most segregated city in America. So for the last 14 years, my wife and I have lived in the 53206 zip code, which is the poorest zip code in Milwaukee. It's 99.2% non-white, and so we're in an anomaly. There's 30,000 people in the zip code. There's 242 that are white. So it's me, my wife, and my 9-year-old and 7-year-old, and our dog. And you see a lot of things living there. And at first, we didn't really ever think that we wanted to do something with our experiences and our observations. But now I kind of think we're at the point where we've seen enough things and kind of seen how. At least like how Milwaukee operates. I lived outside of Chicago for a while, but that was about it. So both my wife and I grew up in suburbs, and so it's a drastically different way of living. So we're like trying to figure out like how what exactly is like the message that we're trying to convey. We're kind of settling on this idea that social justice issues are like one of the last things that somebody thinks about when they purchase a house. And like most people care about paint and flooring, then they care about like the impact that their participation in segregation, basically. And so then we're sort of like landing again like on this idea that like the way that we segregate ourselves is like the last socially acceptable form of racism. And it's really evident in Milwaukee. Again, I don't know how it is, in California or out in Connecticut or Brooklyn, but here, I mean, like when I tell people where we live, like I get no response. I get a blank stare back because it's incomprehensible that we live in a place that the median household income over here is $24,000 a year, and so we're not rich by any means, but we do much better than that. And so just like again, like this stark contrast of 30,000 black people living in poverty, and then us not being black, obviously, and not living in poverty, and like the way that like we're able to see things over the last 14 years of how systemic racism plays out, and how I mean we've had neighbors who I've known as children grow up to adults, and now we just like see like what a life is like when you grow up in poverty, and it's something that I haven't heard articulated very well, just in general. And so obviously, like, ever since the George Floyd murder, like race is an issue that people care about now, apparently. So that's like something that, we're thinking, okay, well, we kind of gave a shit about that a long time ago and got blank stares about it. And now like, well, we have like all this other experience. So like, how do we disseminate that information without alienating people? Because literally all of my friends live in suburbs, and like I don't want like I have no interest in pointing a finger and telling like some random person like you made a terrible decision. However, like I can connect the dots and say, well, like because you separated yourself and now you're asking the question like, well, what do I do to racially reconcile America? Well, you separated yourself so far that you can't, and so there really isn't a whole lot that you can do. And so again, like I don't know, we've got a couple of ideas.
Awesome, by the way. I just got like, did that happen? You used to hit by a lightning bolt on that one. What can I do? You're too far. You separate. Okay, put a pin in that. We're coming back to that one. Keep going.
Okay. Forgot what we were talking about.
I'm sorry, I totally interrupted you, but there's some.
I don't want to alienate anybody with your information.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, because that's not the point. The point isn't to point a finger and say like you're a terrible, shitty person. The point is like let's just like eventually decide that we're not going to do this anymore. And so like one of the analogies that we like to use is the idea of like a year ago, every person that I know was using a plastic straw all the time, and now you go to whatever Starbucks or wherever you go to. And they don't give you a plastic straw anymore because now plastic straws are the devil. Like we've all just decided that we're not going to do that anymore.
Yes.
And
yes.
And like if I was like drinking something and using a plastic straw right now, like I wouldn't throw it away and like think I did something to help the environment. I would just the next time just choose to not grab one, or I would choose to do something different. Or I would say, well, okay, because I can't like physically do anything because I have separated myself so far, maybe I can like reorient some other part of my life, like to try to like systematically make a difference, or grow in my own understanding of what would have to happen for racial reconciliation to take place. So so that's kind of where we're at now. Like we have like a blog that we kind of started, but it's mostly just like to get ideas out, and then like my wife and I just sit at night and have conversations about what, I don't know, just life in general and things we see. So we had like a neighbor up the street. So like I live right across from the highway, and the highway was put in. It was an all black neighborhood when the highway was put in. This neighborhood used to be an all white German neighborhood, and then it was redlined, and white flight kind of just got everybody out of there. And so when that started to happen, the highway was put in. So it's like a real like physical, like I look at the highway and I think, okay, that was like the highway being here was a racist decision because it was like they just didn't care. Like it was, the neighborhood was going to hell because all the wealth had moved out of the neighborhood, and then like there was just pockets of poverty left to kind of grow and perpetuate. So I guess I could probably talk like about specific neighbors and things, and so I don't know, but that's just kind of like where we're at, is like, well, what do you do with that information, and how do you present it in a way that doesn't just
right.
I don't want the tone to be defensive. Like I don't want the second part of that conversation for it to be like, oh yeah, well I'm this. Well, it's fine. Like you just be you. We're gonna be us. But I just want to at least let you know, like, this is what happens when we all decide to separate ourselves based on wealth. That it's actually, at least in Milwaukee again, we're separating based on race.
Oh man, this is awesome. Okay, so let's do a couple of communication things real fast. There is the impulse that rose up within you and your wife that we should say something about our experiences. So let's separate the impulse and the form. Something within the two of you is like, we have some things we want to say about this, but then the form it took was blog. You see how those are two different things? The impulse and the form it takes? So first question, is there a new form better than the blog? Or are you fine continuing with the blog? You see how that's because sometimes people are like, I just want to write a book. I'm like, hold on, what do you want to say? Mm-hmm. And what made you think book? Because sometimes people are stuck because they're like, oh, it's not a book. Right. Notice how it's actually this or that. So the two things got welded. So let's just unweld them for a second. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Is there a medium that makes you more go, oh, no, we should do now that? Because you have like live events, long form book, short films. You see what I mean about just all the different ways you could tell this. You could talk about this. So before we get to how and how it's not defensive and how it's inviting and how it's all that, I just want to ask quickly, is there some form that you think, oh my word, if we did it, now that would be interesting?
I think we're at the point where the blog was just, have you ever got,
wheels.
What do you say?
Was the blog training wheels? Just
yeah.
Some way to say something?
Have you ever had like a traumatic experience? Like living here is like a traumatic experience. I think it took like 10 years to realize like what we were living in.
Yeah. So the two of you are actually working something out.
Yeah, and that's what the blog is. I wasn't able to speak about this until I started writing it down. Yeah.
Right. It's almost like the two of you. It took 10 years for the two of you to realize what you decided to do 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So does the blog still have energy for you? Is the blog still how you work this out? Or is there some new expression? Which you may not know, but is there some new way to work this out?
It'd be great if there was. Yeah. And I would be happy to take suggestions.
Right. So but notice, is there something, take a deep breath and see if there's something that comes up.
I think
maybe it's something that you do with her,
Yeah.
But is there some next way to do this? You see what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know what it is.
Okay. Now, something about it sounds like there's some relationship between racism and real estate for you. There's something about these giant problems that everybody's now talking about. You have a perspective on these problems.
Right.
So, do you notice how if you keep it at the experience that you had, then the defensive, trying to convince people, you're just telling what you observed. The freeway. So notice how when you were you looking out your window at the freeway?
Yeah.
Okay. Notice how when you look out the window and just riff on the freeway, that just comes effortlessly. That's just literally when I look out this window, this is what I see. And this is the history. So when you did that little riff looking out the window, that had history. It had the German roots to the neighborhood. It had redlining, political policy. It had real estate shifts. It had economic patterns built into it. It had government leaders allowing particular decisions to be made. It had 7 and 9-year-old kids. It had the view. You see how many different layers were in that one glimpse?
Yeah. Is that
Okay.
good? I don't know.
But notice how that little glimpse, there's a world, it's like a layer cake. That one glimpse out your window says more than 1,000 arguments about why people should move or care. You just telling me what you see out your window is more convicting than you trying to convince me of anything. It's almost like if you just report on what your life is like in this neighborhood and what you see, it's more devastating and convicting than any argument you could make.
I would love to be in the room when you and your wife are just ripping in the evenings.
I know. We're going to get to that in a second.
Love that. It sounds
Right.
like it's something where you guys are heartfelt and you care, or you're frustrated or you're angry, or it could be something that you saw on your way home from work that you're like, you know what I saw again?
Yeah, right. We're going to get to that in a second. Because the thing between he and his wife is actually, Zen, I feel the same. Like, the thing between the two of them and the decision they made and the fact that they're both made that decision and they're still together is
And
like
they're-
deeply interesting. And it's more interesting than he realizes. It's more interesting than he realizes.
I agree, 100%.
Yeah. Okay, so Alex, at the peak of the Bosnians Sarajevo bombing, like when that war was 92, U2 was on tour. It was the Zoo tour, and there were people living in basements all over Sarajevo. And there was a guy named Bill Carter who had a TV hookup, and U2 started broadcasting this guy in his basement in the Civil War onto the screens partway through the show, and they would just ask him, "How was your day?" So that U2 tour was costing $250,000 a day, the biggest staging ever. There's stadiums full of people, and partway through the show, all they would do is beam to this guy in his basement with a little camera and ask him questions about his day, and it wrecked people. Wrecked them. There are legendary stories, the Berlin Olympic Stadium, of the U2 show, like, the band couldn't recover the second half of the show after they had him talk to them over the speakers. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, just a dude, this is what it was like today. What was that noise? We just heard some bombs go off.
Yeah. Gunshots or fireworks. It's a game we play.
Right. And it's legendary in concert circles for just how it ended up having so much unexpected power. When it was surrounded by actual spectacle and power, it was still more powerful. There's something about the two of you having this experience, reflecting on this experience, that you do effortlessly that's actually the interesting thing. I mean, if you sit around each evening, but I would love to hear the two of you talk about what were we thinking 10 years ago? Let's go back. Why did we do this? Okay, the thing you said about George Floyd, like people apparently now are caring. what it's like for you to suddenly have everybody care.
That's why we've never done anything with living here, because nobody. I couldn't carry on a conversation with anybody because nobody thought there was a problem.
And now,
I mean, not nobody, but I mean, like, generally.
Right. So let's because notice how with Zen, just the story that she's telling is incredibly powerful. You somehow had an instinct 10 years ago, and now you actually have a number of very helpful things to say at the exact moment when millions of people would love to hear, would love some guidance on all this. So even like how to get involved. Your real estate and racism relationship is actually a sub-riff of a larger how do you get involved. Well, you have to understand the structure of real estate. You moved away from it. So when you start to ask it from our perspective, there's some even larger questions you could be asking. You're a much more compelling speaker than you realized. For the record, I'm speaking on behalf of the committee.
I agree.
Do you agree?
Right things. I just want to, sorry, Rob, but you said so many things right, and you're open. And so the language that you've chosen and how your energy is about it and the respect you have for all concerned, and it's all good, Alex.
I know. It's so good.
All very, very good. And I'm not talking like politically correct good. I'm talking it's just
airtight. Don't you kind of want to meet Mrs. Alex?
She's great. She's at the grocery store.
I'm like, I guarantee she's she's like riveting to have like jumped into this with him.
I mean, I think she is, but
I mean, obviously the two of you talking lends itself to podcast, but
there's a Blog Talk Radio. It's a radio platform. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I'm on there, and you can take callers if you want to in the future. They literally give a call line, and you can take callers. And it's recorded, and they syndicate everywhere, all through all the platforms, and it's like $40 a month, and it's awesome. It's a really great interface. But I like a live radio show, especially if you get comfortable enough to be like, call in.
What is the in Milwaukee? Does everybody know the name of that? Is that zip code known in Milwaukee?
Yeah. It's statistically the worst place for an African American male to grow up in the country.
Wow.
And if my son was black, he'd have a 50-50 chance of going to prison.
Okay. So do you see there is an iconic, that zip code has a power in your part of the world.
Yeah.
And as soon as you told me it then has power for me. Oh, I know where he lives. Because your place is everywhere, but it's also only where you are.
Mm-hmm.
So that number is pretty sweet. What you know about that neighborhood, why you moved in there is awesome and mysterious, which is a lovely, you know what I mean? It's very, very compelling. I want to know more from you. I want to hear from you. Just naturally, the three of us are like, tell me more. What's it like? Tell me more. What do you think about? I actually have a long list of things that's growing of things I want to hear you riff about. And I want to hear you and your wife talk about. I want to hear you and your wife talk about being parents in that environment. I want to hear you and your wife talk about money in that environment. I want you to tell me stories of what you've seen. I want to tell me how you think about Democratic candidates. I want to hear how you think about this. You have it's just all really compelling. It's really compelling.
It's good to know.
And then
I didn't know, so it's nice to know that.
And something about the zip code. I know you're a white guy in a black area. Something about the zip code and the shape of the county, the iconic, you know how a county has like a shape, like an outline?
Yeah.
Like a logo kind of thing?
It's not exactly. It's not a marketing logo as like throw up in your mouth. It's like a pride and ownership of space and land. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If I saw that outline and it had the number of the zip code, It was like there's this couple who live there. They're one of 232 white people. And they talk about what life is like there and how they see it.
Totally.
Yeah, you gotta hear it. You just gotta hear it. And sometimes I have guests.
County like symbol on a shirt. That
I know.
means
I know.
Barb
I know. I know.
Right? It's like, this is actually what it's really like and why you can't do, you're too far away, you can't do something and all that. And just having a story, your story told about your neighborhood and the community and all of that, that when people approach the conversation, they've automatically been changed by the story.
I know, it's like really, really compelling.
Really good. Yeah.
And because it's real, then it just gets a free pass on any sort of cheap marketing branding things because it's like they actually live there. Like, Alex, my brother and I, this is probably 15 years ago, I lived in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and that was at the height of Detroit's sort of collapse. We made a t-shirt of the outline of the state of Michigan and put a star where Detroit is, and in big letters it just says, "Don't call it a comeback," which was like a shout out to Detroit. Jack White had just opened Third Man Records there. It was like just the first few things of like rebirth. And we just I think we put it online just laughing because it was like inspiring to us. And people bought that shirt like crazy out of some heart. It was like heartfelt. You know what I mean? Like Detroit, like we don't give up on Detroit. There's some reclaiming of land. Whereas right now, if you go to any off-ramp on the freeway, there's an Applebee's and there's a Napa Auto Parts. Like, all places are the same.
Mm-hmm.
Like, where are you from? What does soil mean? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What does location? And you're, like, in an actual location. That's like a massive thing that is being reclaimed. I mean, farm to table, a lot of people growing gardens, all that, is actually land and soil matters. You have, like, a whole world here. Which is why I asked you about form, is I was like, it's too narrow to be it's not a medium, it's a world that you let us into. Does that make sense? So if you were like, my wife and I just really want to do a book, I'd be like, okay, fine. But please tell me there's other things than just a book or just it's an ecosystem that you inhabit, that you let us into. Here's what it's like. Here's what we think. Because you have seriously great thoughts on things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like,
I would listen.
Yeah. I don't even listen to podcasts, and I'm like, I would listen to this.
I absolutely would. Absolutely. I would tune in and I would spread the word. I already like listening to you just from the beginning of explaining yourself. I already was hooked by you.
Alex, are there people in the neighborhood that you've met, that you're friends with, that have interesting things to say?
They don't see it as that, but
Right.
yeah, I mean, yeah.
But you do.
Yeah, well, I don't want to, I know we're getting close on time, but I mean, I was just
No, you're
over, there's a guy, his name's Charlie, and he grew up, he actually lived in his house before the freeway was put in, and so he got dementia and Alzheimer's. He actually died a couple of days ago. But we've known him, kind of like throughout the time that we've lived there and he lived there. He's the type of guy, he would, you'd see him in the morning, leave for work at the same time in the morning, and he'd be out there with a pair of scissors cutting his grass, to make it perfect out in the front of his yard. And so his house is meticulous. It's beautiful. It's 120 years old and all the woodwork's in immaculate condition, and he just kept it perfect. And when he got dementia and Alzheimer's, his wife wanted to move out of the house so that she could be closer to him. And so we bought the house, and so now I'm renovating the house, and you can just see his his spirit inside of that house, where you see things that he did that you only do if you really love something. And so I don't know exactly what there is with this, but he stayed here even though he didn't two things. He stayed here even though he probably didn't have to, but in a lot of ways he actually had to stay here because the house, we bought the house for $35,000. I'm guessing that's probably what his parents bought it for when when he was born in that house. And so you kind of think, well, what does that do to somebody if you've lived in a house for 80 years and there used to be a bunch of white people living there and now they're not, and now it's all kind of like crumbling down around you, and you can't move because you can't afford to move, and you're kind of stuck there. But even though you're stuck there, you're still like out there cutting your grass with scissors and like keeping your place beautiful. So that's what I was working on before I came over here. But yeah, so yes, there's a ton of that, a ton of stories just like that, like where you think like how did we as a society let that happened, and we were okay with it. Guy was a phenomenal human being, and just because he was black, basically, and in the wrong place, it just never materialized. He even worked for the post office, so like it wasn't like he was like marginalized in his career field. He just because of where he was geographically. If he would have lived a mile and a half that way, and I'm pointing east, he house would have been worth $250,000-$300,000, and like he would have had much better care at the end of his life. Like, he didn't, because the house wasn't worth anything.
It's so good. It's all so Happy, are you with me on this? So interesting. So compelling. There's a Charlie episode, a proper eulogy for Charlie.
Yeah.
Which is also a lament for America, which is also about healthcare, which is about cutting your lawn with scissors, which is about the difference a mile and a half makes, which is about you and him going to work at the same, which is about the post office, which is $75 billion in debt, and Trump is threatening to close it down because he knows it's related to voting by mail, and if you have voting by mail, then more people will vote, and more people voting always is better for you know what I mean? Like there's, once again, like 11 things in that one thing you just said. Yeah. I actually, I actually think about your version of This American Life.
Yes, I was just thinking this.
Were you saying that? Yeah, you and your wife.
Wrap it up in a nice little bow. Leave it, open it. Don't try to explain it or do anything. Just
this is, Alex, do you know Fugazi? Do you know like early punk?
Yeah.
Okay. You and your wife, I just keep picturing you and your wife like the Fugazi of NPR. You know what I'm saying? Of This American, like, these are snapshots, but there's like there's no nice music and nothing, it doesn't get wrapped up like Zen said. It's just, we're coming to you from our kitchen table. Today's episode is called Mowing the Lawn with Scissors. It's all about Charlie. Every memory we have, you know what I mean? Next episode, the freeway. And we see a picture, we get the picture somehow online somewhere, the picture out the window. This whole episode is about this picture. Go to whatever, our blog, so you can see the picture. Then we're going to talk about this picture. I'll show you what we see. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's really, really interesting. I don't know if she would enjoy that, but we would. Yeah. I mean, there's got to be a representative for that county or district, or you invite that person to your table and talk to them.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're creating, I mean, we obviously need a completely new way of thinking about politics, but you're like creating the new way that it works. This is how it works. It's people like you start inviting people to your table, start telling these stories, and things start to shift.
It's that easy, right?
What?
So no, it's just that easy.
Actually, one of the things that happens on these calls again and again and again is the person has some question, and the next step that sort of gets them on their way, generally what they say is they remark at how it's way more simple than I thought it would be. Way more simple. Like they actually know how to do the next step. In the same way that you just did like a Charlie thing like that, and it had everything you want to say in the Charlie story. Everything you want to say in the looking out the window. You know what I mean? Like, you just did it effortlessly. That's all I'm pointing out. And we were riveted.
Well, it's nice for some feedback that I'm not insane, so I appreciate that.
No. You're definitely
because I wonder sometimes. So.
No, you're actually sane. I think that part of your problem is you're sane. I think that's part of your dissonance. You're actually Have you read Walter Brueggemann's Another Kingdom? There's a new book that just came out. It's a thin paperback, Another Kingdom. And it's all about how consumer ideology is actually killing people and what a return to neighborliness. He calls it neighborliness. It's 3 scholars. But it's actually a vision for a whole new understanding of life together, economics, politics, etc. It's a thin little paperback book that just came out. Completely revolutionary, also very ancient. But you are like the embodiment of what all of these scholars and the wisdom tradition are saying is how societies are sane. People like you are like, no, you're the sane ones. You're the sane ones. That's what's so difficult for you is you're surrounded by a lot of insanity. So yeah, we could use your voice. Yeah, I'd listen to that. Live from the 90, what was it, 40, what was the zip code number again?
Yeah, 53206.
The 53206. And that's just great. It's just, what's your wife's name?
Meg.
Alex and Meg. Yeah. I don't even listen to podcasts, and I would be like, oh yeah, I gotta listen to that one. Or whatever, whatever form you want. But man, it would be kind of interesting, wouldn't it? Try that.
Yeah.
Do you have that techie friend who loves this stuff? Who would be like, yeah, okay, I'll take care of posting it. Do you have that guy? That woman who?
My wife's a web designer, so yeah, it's fine. Let's do that.
Buried the lead. There we go. There's some sort of, in the ancient tradition, the suffering is always manifest in a cry. So Cain kills Abel and God says, hey, your brother's blood cries out from the ground. The Hebrew word is sa'ak. But there's this ancient tradition of the cry. And the cry is, does anybody hear the cry? I think it's going to, or the entire Bible is the story of the cry. Does anybody hear this cry? And there's either indifference to the cry. So you have Pharaoh who has slaves who are in misery. But then the Exodus story is the slaves, these Hebrew slaves cried out. And the radical idea in the Exodus story is God hears them. So most gods are fine with the slavery. They create the cry. They create the misery. But the radical nature of the Hebrew story was this sort of whole new conception of the divine. The divine actually hears the cry. But you can trace it all the way through. Jesus goes into a village, a man cries out, and his disciples are like, be quiet. Jesus hears the cry. So this goes back to the end of the book of Revelation. There are no more tears for the cry. But you hear the cry. You hear it. And the way that revolutions occur and the way that people change is somebody helps them tune in order so they can hear the cry. So there's actually an ancient thing. So when you're like, people need to hear this cry. By the way, when people tell me they're bored, I always ask them if they can hear the cry. And when they say, what do you mean? I go, I rest my case.
Amen.
You see what I mean? It's just a way of seeing things. So my sense, Alex, is you can hear a cry, and actually culturally, because of George Floyd, a large number of people suddenly are like, hey, I think there's a cry.
Yeah.
It's like a sort of, hey, I think there's a cry. But people who can actually go, okay, here's what it looks like, here's what it sounds like, here's how you can hear it. And then obviously when you hear it, you move towards it and try to do something. That's what you're doing is actually, your impulse is a very ancient impulse. That's why it moves us so much.
I think, can I say something more, do you mind?
Of course.
I think a lot of people don't think there is a cry. We hear the loudness of people who are doing the Black Lives Matter and what racism and stuff, but I think there's a lot of white people out there who are like, there's no problem. They're making stuff up. They're just trying to be, they're just trying to show
agitated.
And I think it actually is very important for someone such as yourself to talk about the story so someone can go, that is an issue. That is a problem. I don't like that because there's no story attached to it. I mean, Floyd there's a story attached to it. We all got a different opinion about criminal, doing fraudulent behavior, arresting, all this little stuff you can make aside that if you just tell a story, just like you did with Charlie, someone can sit there and think it through for themselves.
Yeah.
That's why I said no Bo. Let them
Yeah.
come up with their own
Yeah.
aha. And I think it's something that you could, I believe I could talk about Charlie to my friends because I listened to you. And I think that's,
Yeah.
this guy and his wife, and they're living here, and this is what they saw today, and people, it's a conversation that could happen. Where current way it's going, it's an accusation that's happening versus a story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is just all new, honestly, to me, that anybody would
I can
care.
record it. I can send it to you. I started it for you.
No, I'm just a little bit in shock that anybody thinks that this is worthwhile. So it's just been so long since somebody thought it was useful. So
Yeah,
It's
it's
a little
really,
taken
really,
aback by
really
it.
compelling and necessary. So anyway, but no, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. So Alex, this is what happens. We meet these fascinating people. How are we doing now?
it's going good.
Anything else that would be of help, or we can just keep telling you how compelling we think this is.
That's very helpful. I don't know. I got a ton of things I could talk about. So I appreciate the feedback. So.
Alex, you have there's a heartfelt connection you have with the house and the neighborhood.
Oh yeah.
You also have a rant mode that has like a prophetic dimension to it, but because you're just telling it like you see it, we accept it, as opposed to some guy who's like, I'm a homeless racism advocate. Get out of my, you know what I mean?
I know
person
exactly
who
what you're
comes
talking
in-
about. Actually, yeah.
Yeah, we just got a whatever text recently from a relative of ours who's now become a radical social justice advocate, and we were around our table just being like, okay, the one thing we know she is not that, because that person would never talk about themselves. That's the most bulky, awkward. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So for you just telling it like you see it is so much. It has so much effortless power to it. So there's like a rant mode that you with your wife talking about your life, but then you doing those bits where you just follow what you want to say about out your window.
Yeah.
Awesome. Really, really great. Yeah. Oh, you three. Anything at the end?